Welcome to Short Talks from the Hill, a research and economic development podcast of the University of Arkansas. My name is Todd Price. We've all noticed over the last few years that the price of eggs has skyrocketed, and sometimes the shelves have been bare. The reason is bird flu. When the virus is found in a flock, the entire flock must be euthanized to stop the spread of the disease. Millions of chickens have been killed. Jada Thompson, an economist in the Dale Bumpers College of Agricultural, Food, and Life Sciences at the University of Arkansas, studies the poultry industry, which is the most important agricultural sector in the state. In her research, she focuses on animal health and livestock economics. She is here today to answer our questions about bird flu. Jada Thompson, welcome to Short Talks.
Welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks. This strain of the bird flu, the H5N1 strain, has been circulating in the United States since around 2022. Is that normal for a bird flu strain to be a problem that long? Is it going to die out, or is it here to stay?
I think the question is, what is normal? I think nobody wants HPI, or highly pathogenic avian influenza, which is that H5N1 strain, to be normal. Historically, most of the strains have died out. So you get warm weather, you see the dying out of kind of the host, and then the virus kind of dies off. Maybe a couple years later, we might get a new strain, or we might go a decade between. This particular one has an effect because it's host adapted, which means that the birds that are carrying it in the wild aren't being as affected as the commercial birds. And so chickens and turkeys are more susceptible and have a higher mortality rate because of the disease. I think the concern is what happens when the host can keep carrying it, and then the birds that are getting it are the commercial birds that we see. I don't want it to be here to stay. I think that we're going to figure out some alternative solutions for control and monitoring and surveillance and eradication. But until that point, I think we're definitely going to have to keep an eye on it.
Is that the main way this is spread, from wild birds to chickens and turkeys?
Wild birds, wild animals. So there's a lot of pest control mechanisms that can spread the disease. You also have fomite transmission, and that's movement of products, so egg cartons and trucks and tractors and trailers and all of these other things that might carry something from one house to another. In general, this specific outbreak has been predominantly spread by wild bird movements and less of that lateral movement, so less of that house-to-house movement.
Poultry is a big industry in Arkansas. In 2024, we seem to have got pretty lucky. There weren't a lot of outbreaks here, but towards the end of the year, there were some. Why did we get lucky, and how do things look for next year?
So Arkansas, while we raise all three of the large poultry sectors, so turkeys, broilers, and layers, which produce the eggs, we're predominantly a broiler state. And so we get lucky geographically on two counts. So we're a little bit more south, so it's a little bit warmer, and that virus doesn't do as well in the heat. And then predominantly because we're raising more broilers, which younger birds aren't as susceptible as older birds. So layer birds are older, they're more susceptible to the disease, which means that the birds that are going to be more likely to get this disease are going to be older chickens, which are going to be those layer birds.
And broilers, those are the chickens we buy to put on the barbecue grill to cook, so that's for meat, right?
Absolutely. So broilers are going to be what we're eating. When I go to Chick-fil-A, that's what I'm consuming. And so they're just not as old, they're less susceptible, and so we're not seeing that happen as many outbreaks in the broiler industry. Not saying that we're not seeing. Arkansas has been hit, and those farms are economically disadvantaged, right? But in general, Arkansas has been pretty lucky overall.
And so that's why when you look over the last few years, there's been some real spikes in egg prices, but price of chickens, broilers has been pretty steady, some increases, but not those kind of crazy spikes, right?
Absolutely. So if we look at the total outbreak from 2022 to today, predominantly, this has affected layers and turkeys. And so chickens, while they have been, or those broilers have been impacted, we're not seeing huge cases of those. So there's a little bit of some raise in prices, but predominantly those largest impacts are going to be in those egg prices. And so we've seen those spikes, those high prices in late 22, 23. In 2024, Christmas time, we saw the highest prices we've ever seen, but those are going to be related to egg supplies.
And so you said layers, those are the chickens that we get eggs from. And you said they're more susceptible because they're older. Why turkeys?
Turkeys are also more susceptible. There's some research that's shown that turkeys are susceptible to this and older chickens are. It's a sad state for those layers that they just happen to be older birds and that turkeys specifically are susceptible.
So we call this bird flu, but other animals have been infected. House cats, big cats at zoos and animal parks, cows, even some people. How concerned should we be about this spreading to other animals, becoming a larger pandemic and a larger issue?
Yeah, so I heard a veterinarian the other day make a statement that while we call it bird flu, it's an influenza virus, and that specifically it can spread to any animal. It's zoonotic, which is spreads between animals. I think that we are concerned. The concern is that it becomes human to human transfer. And so when we get into cattle, it's not having the same impact. So cows they don't have high mortality rates like chickens do.
So they get sick, but they don't die.
Exactly. And we don't have to depopulate cows because they're getting sick. We just remove their milk from the system. And then whenever they recover, they get back into the system. The concern is always when it gets into humans, will it become human to human transfer? And that becomes the concern that we have in terms of watching it. And so, yes, we are concerned about it. You talk about every large influenza event in human history up to this point has typically come from birds. Spanish influenza of 1918 was a bird flu. We don't want that to happen. I think we're trying to make all of the control mechanisms we can, but we are watching it to make sure it's not becoming mutating into a human-to-human transfer.
For those of us who don't study the poultry industry or work in it, we see the effects primarily of this bird flu in the price of eggs. Go to the grocery store, eggs get more expensive, or there's not many on the shelves. It makes sense. When a flock gets infected, you have to kill off the entire flock to stop the spread. How localized are these effects? I mean, if there is a flock in Missouri that has to be wiped out, are we going to feel it in Arkansas? Are they going to feel it in Texas, California, the whole country? Or are these much more localized effects when the prices get higher?
So I'm an economist, and we're going to equivocate a little on both of those questions. So there are regional and there are national effects. And so it depends on how large the outbreak is, and it depends a little bit on the system that it's coming into. And so we might feel those egg prices in Arkansas from Missouri. I'm going to guess that in general, Texas might not as much. And so there's this spatial degradation of that impact. But there are very large pockets of egg production. So the Midwest, Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, we have these large pockets of egg production that are also producing a lot of processed egg products. So when you and I eat eggs, we think the scrambled eggs we make for breakfast. We also eat eggs in breads and cakes and cookies and all of the other goods that use eggs as emulsifiers. We feel those impacts everywhere across the U.S. because all of those processed egg products aren't necessarily locally produced. Those might be produced in Iowa. And so both is the answer, that we both have kind of these regional impacts and the large national scale.
We see those egg prices spike up. What you're saying is also there are increases in other products that maybe we don't notice as much because they're not as dramatic. Is that what's happening?
What we see is that those other products that use eggs might increase their prices a little bit. There's a little bit of some sticky price effect, so it might not increase immediately. Also, there's shrinkflation that happens, and so we might also have this impact where somebody might reduce a scale or size of their product just slightly to reduce that kind of price pinch. You can't reduce the size of a carton of eggs. I want a dozen eggs. I want 12 eggs. We see the direct impacts, and we don't get to see the little bit of shrinkflation to kind of offset those impacts.
So when prices go up because there's been an outbreak, how long does it take for them to come back?
I did a study with some colleagues at the university here, James Mitchell and Trey Malone, who's now at Purdue University, and we basically showed that egg prices, because of biological lags in the replenishment system, you're going to see about a 5-month lag in terms of when eggs can get back into the system. And so there's some impact for at least 5 to 6 months. At the end of the day, it's not the same high price for those 6 months, but there isn't this system that happens where the prices are going to be impacted until you can get supplies back online, and it just takes a while to get supplies back online. You can't hurry biology.
Is there anything we can do to change the way we produce eggs, distribute eggs, that could lessen the impacts?
I think obviously some control measures, and I think we're trying to do everything we can to reduce the disease incidence. I think there's a lot of things that the egg industries are doing to adjust supplies or intentionally adjusting how the replenishment system on the off chance that we're getting the disease. I think there's a balance between controlling. You're having to predict when a disease is going to happen, and you're having to predict how many birds are going to be out of that system. And if I have overcompensated, now I have too many birds. And now the cost of eggs aren't going to compensate for my having an oversupply, and effectively I'm going to lose money. And so there's this nice balance of trying to predict how many birds are going to be impacted, but also not overpredict or not have an oversupply of birds.
Right, because we have no idea when an outbreak will occur or where it will occur, right?
Exactly, and that is a bit of the issue or the concern within the egg industry is 2023 wasn't a big year. And so if they had responded the way they did in 2022, we'd have had massive oversupply. And then 2024, we started seeing those numbers peak back up. But how did we know that 24 was going to be a big year? And so it's a little bit of a moving target. And if somebody out there can do some really great forecasting, I have a job for you.
This has been around for several years. We don't know how long it'll be around. Is there anything we can do, or is this just what we're going to have to live with?
I think for right now, until either disease dies out or we get some kind of other control measure like a vaccine, I think we're going to have to just keep an eye on the marketplace. It's going to keep floating around. We're showing that it's not going away, that we're going to have to continue to address this and thinking about how we readjust our supplies, our replenishment systems to adjust for the disease outbreak.
Well, Jada, thanks for coming.
Yeah,
really
thanks for
appreciate
having
it. Great conversation.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Short Talks from the Hill is now available wherever you get your podcasts. For more information and additional podcasts, visit arkansasresearch.uark.edu, the home of science and research news at the University of Arkansas. Music for Short Talks from the Hill was written and performed by local musician Ben Harris.